what I want to do is introduce our next two speakers. Tim Cohn, who's our director of our productivity practice, David Broussard, who's our director of our digital workplace solutions, are both, between the two of them, been with the organization a long time, probably combined together over 40 years of experience, and phenomenal leaders in this space. And I think what you're going to find is, as we're going through the various different topics, it's going to span array of technologies and across infrastructure, data, application, communications, and more. So I ask you to lean in and enjoy the session. David and Tim have spent a lot of time working through kind of what their vision, working through that maturity model, and hopefully can help you with the journey that each and every one of your organizations are currently in, as well as that future state you're leaning toward. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Tim and David.
Thank you, Terry, and welcome everybody. It's exciting to talk to everyone who's both on now and who will see this later in the recording. Very much appreciate your time today and the chance to talk to you about this. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart when we talk about organizational maturity and how to improve across your organization with, well, when I started back as a certified software quality engineer and looking at things like CMMI and the CMMI capability maturity model and other ways to improve organizational quality and to plan and grow your products or your software that you were making, you know, I think I probably had limited vision about where all this would go. And I don't think anybody expected to be in the situation we're in now and where that was going. And it's really, really fascinating to see how things are evolving and how our workplace is evolving. So thanks, Dave. Hit the next slide there.
Yeah.
So as Terry said, my name is Tim Cohn. I'm the National Practice Director for our modern work practice here at Catapult. I've been with Catapult for 10 years. I've been consulting for a few more than that, as you might tell by all my gray hair. And then I'll let David introduce himself as well.
Well, thank you, Tim. My name is David Broussard, and as Terry said, I am the Director of the Digital Workplace Solutions for Catapult Systems. I've been with Catapult for about 14 and a half years, and when you see me later on, you'll see I have not quite as much gray as Tim, but darn close. I like to say that it shows our experience in working through all of this. We have a lot of experience, and we have a lot of scar tissue we bring to the table through that. So, Tim, why don't you run over our agenda that we're going to be going on today?
Thanks, David. Yeah, so today we'll talk about just a little bit about M365 and how we see it as a digital workplace platform, right? To build out all of those experiences, and Cyril talked about that in his opening remarks about the people, the places, or the processes, as we like to look at too, and the technology. And when we talk about how to measure those things and how to build those things that are enhancing your digital workplace, enhancing the digital experience of your customers. You know, when we look at that, we look at M365 and the toolbox that's available there.
The entire Microsoft Cloud.
Yeah, the entire Microsoft Cloud, really. And so, and then the next section we'll cover is where are you in your journey and how do you figure that out? The third agenda item, of course, maturity models. We'll talk a little bit about history around CMMI and why it works in this instance, and then we'll talk about how we apply that to individual customers' situations. Because, you know, for a lot of organizations, you have your singular journey in creating the digital employee experience that you need for you. Here at Catapult, we work with, I guess it's no exaggeration to say, hundreds of clients, and help them with their own digital workplace journey. And so what we try and do in these types of presentations is bring some of that experience from doing this many, many times to organizations that are really doing this either for the first time, or this is their journey, this is the one journey that they're interested in. And you can learn a lot from both the successes and the challenges of others. Thanks, David. So let's talk a little bit about the digital workplace platform. So we wanted to get our taxonomy, and those of you who work in SharePoint, you love that word taxonomy. I always love it. It's our shared vocabulary, right? We want to get our taxonomy about the digital workplace aligned here. And so when we talk about digital workplace, it's a industry term, and it's been relatively genericized now, but it is the alignment of the things that Cyril was talking about: the people, the business processes, the technology, right, that allows you to improve the efficiency within your organization and accomplish your goals. And that, to us at Catapult, is the key. What are your organizational goals? What do you want to achieve business-wise as an organization? And then we can look at how these tools, right, how the technology helps you do that. And so in a large part, the digital workplace is really meant to be a virtual complement to your physical office space. And we're seeing that more and more, even with the arrival of new technology like Teams Mesh, which you may or may not have heard of, but what brings Teams into the virtual reality space, which makes it a true virtual complement to the physical office. And the introduction of augmented and mixed reality as well as virtual reality into the digital workplace is something that seems a little science fiction, maybe a little Minority Report, but is actually right on the doorstep for many organizations, if not already being used by organizations to bring the digital workplace, to make the digital workplace even more integrated. And then on the other side of this slide, I think you'll see the toolbox for the digital workplace is it's big. I mean, there is a lot across all of Microsoft's clouds, whether you're talking Dynamics, Azure, M365, and then even just within M365, all of the things that you can do in Teams and Stream and Outlook and OneDrive and SharePoint. I mean, the tools are, to tell you the truth, a bit overwhelming. We spend a lot of time as an organization keeping up on the latest and greatest of all of these tools and looking at what's coming next in this toolbox. And it's a challenge for any organization to get your hands around all of those tools, much less to align those tools to meet your business objectives. David. So for us, we've tried to simplify this big wheel, right, into what we see as our workplace building, right? So if you think about this as a building, we have foundational components, we have the rooms in the building where things get done, and then we have a roof, right, over our building. At the foundation of your digital workplace are core concepts around security, compliance, governance, and analytics that have to be addressed, right? And Catapult has worked with a lot of customers to try and get at collaborations, communications, and apps and automation to get at what I call the really fun part of the digital workplace. But without addressing your foundation, you can build a beautiful set of capabilities that get crumbled by a security breach or are out of compliance with a particular compliance paradigm that you're subject to, whether that be, say, CJIS, like criminal justice, or FERC, the federal energy, GDPR, as an example, HIPAA, yeah, PCI. There's a whole lot of compliance regimes that we need to work underneath to make work safe and to make work secure for everybody in the organization, so and our customers. And so security, compliance, governance, controlling that toolbox. What kind of tools are we putting where, when, as well as what's happening with the information in our tenant, right? The information that we're creating and whether or not that's governed. And then analytics are core to measuring everything we'll do. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's all built within a modern infrastructure. Adoption change management helps us roll out these capabilities to the people in our organization. And then we have the components around collaboration, communication, and applications and automation that are all supported by the M365 and Azure toolboxes, as well as then on top of that, what all of this work really is meant to focus on is the digital employee experience. But if you talk about each one of these separate components of the digital workplace, what takes priority, right? Where are we in each one of these things? What do we mean by digital employee experience, and how are we driving that? Those are all questions that come up and actually need to be tailored organization by organization. There are some specific things that all organizations should do on a best practices standpoint. However, there are also some very organizationally specific challenges that we need to, or goals that we need to address in what your digital employee experience needs to be. Thanks, David.
Sure. And thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. So let's talk a little bit about, how do we figure out where I am today? I mean, so for a lot of us, we've already entered into the Microsoft cloud. Maybe we already are using Microsoft 365 or Azure or Dynamics or anything, or maybe we're still on premise. And so understanding where we are today is actually the critical starting point of our journey. So when we think about this, there's an old adage: every journey starts with the first step, no matter how far you're going. But another way of looking at that is, I was telling Tim earlier, I said, what if Tim told me, hey, David, we're going to go to New York? And I go, great, let's go west. Let's go west to get to New York. Well, that only works if New York is to the west of us, if we were, say, in London. But I'm down in Texas, so that means if I want to get to New York, I've got to go north and east. So if I don't know where I am to start with, and that's critically important, then we run the risk of actually moving the wrong direction. And so how do we figure out where we are today? And so, I like to call this our digital GPS, right? So that's what we're thinking about now is how we set up our digital GPS. And there's an awful lot of tools that are available to us. In fact, there are so many tools available to us to determine where we are inside of our journey, where we are inside of our maturity, how we're using the Microsoft cloud, that it's actually overwhelming. And what most organizations tend to do is they kind of think of it more as in an anecdotal sense. It's, I'm doing okay, so I think my organization's doing okay. And nobody's complaining too loudly, so I think we're doing all right. But the reality is we do need to take a look at all of these measurements that are out there. And there's an awful lot that already exist out there in the world today. For example, inside of Microsoft 365, there's some good usage reports that will actually let you know how many people inside your organization are actually using Microsoft 365 today. How many people are in Exchange, as an example? How much content is being stored in your OneDrive? How much stuff is being stored inside of SharePoint? How many sites do you have? How many teams do you have? What the membership looks like inside of that. Now, the problem is that information is stored in a lot of different places. And that means that you, as part of your analysis, are going to have to learn how to go to all of these different places and pull that information in. Now, when you add in, for example, Azure on top of that, there's a whole bunch of logs that are kept inside of Azure. For example, every time somebody attempts to authenticate against your Azure AD, well, Microsoft tracks that and throws it into a log file. Right? And that means that there's two things I can learn from that. One, I can find out when people are logging in. That's great. I can also find out when people tried to log in and failed. And from a security standpoint, that's actually critically important to us, to know when people tried to get into my system and were unable, and more importantly, where they came from, because we're tracking, for example, their IP address or Microsoft, I should say, is tracking the IP address of where that person tried to get in from. Okay, so because we have all of this data that's all over the place, it's actually really difficult to get a handle on it. So Microsoft has actually created 3 different what we call scores that we can take a look at to find out more information about where we are and how we're using Microsoft 365. So one score people are pretty familiar with this is the security score. And that's the score that's letting you know, hey, with all the stuff that Microsoft provides you, and it's different based on your level of license, right? How much are you actually taking advantage of? And it'll give you a score, and they'll even provide you with some quick and dirty, or actually not quick and dirty, but actually some click button almost levels of remediation. Oh, I need to turn on MFA. Oh, I need to go ahead and make sure that I've got my password complexity set to a certain level. These different kinds of security aspects are laid out for you, and it will give you a score and also tell you how you compare to other organizations that are in general and also relative to you with your size, your industry, and the license level that you have. And you can use that kind of score to get a feel for where you are from a security standpoint and also what you need to improve. There's a similar compliance score that Microsoft provides. Now, the compliance score is a little different than the security score. It doesn't tell you take this action, flip this switch. It's actually more designed to say, hey, if you're going to implement, for example, NIST standards, 800-53, or you need to do GDPR, or you need to do HIPAA, the vast majority of those compliance requirements are actually not technological ones, and the technological ones Microsoft has already done for you for the most part. What's remaining are things like writing processes. So as an example, one example of that would be, what do you do when an account gets breached? What is the specific process that you go through? How do you notify the person? How do you determine that it hasn't been spread throughout your organization? How do you make sure that you haven't been, just because an account has been breached, make sure they haven't moved laterally through your organization? And the compliance score actually gives you, and when I say hundreds, I mean literally hundreds of specific activities that you should go through as an organization to make sure that you've documented all of the areas of your organization to make sure that you're actually meeting these compliance goals. And then the last score I'll talk about is the productivity score. And the productivity score is actually fascinating to me because what Microsoft is doing is taking a bunch of those usage reports and logs that are out there, and they're kind of summarizing them for you. And then they're giving you an idea about how you're doing in leveraging some of the productivity elements inside of Microsoft 365. So as an example inside of there, one of the little reports they give you will tell you how many people in your organization in the last 90 days sent an email with an attachment. See, in Microsoft 365, we don't want to send attachments. What I want to do instead is I want to share a link to the file. It's actually more secure because I maintain control over that file than sending an attachment. Once I send that attachment out there, now I've got multiple copies of the information. Maybe it's in people's mailboxes as well as they've downloaded it to a hard drive or stuck it someplace else. If it's gone outside the organization, I've completely lost control of that document at that point in time. So Microsoft is encouraging us to instead share a link to that document. Well, the productivity score gives you an idea about, well, who's still sending attachments out there? And for the most part, people are still often very much sending attachments. So these different scores offer you another clue as to how you're using Microsoft 365, and especially when you're just starting to use Microsoft 365, is giving you some great feedback on how to do it. Now, these application-specific reports, that gets to another level. One example of that would be to take a look inside of Dynamics 365. If you're using that part of the Microsoft Cloud, that's going to give you a lot of information about how people are tracking things inside of Dynamics. But you may also create your own applications or Power Automate full-fledged applications running in Azure, things that are running inside of SharePoint, and you can actually look at reports based on those. Of course, you have to build those reporting mechanisms for the most part into those applications. And then Microsoft also provides with Viva Insights, whether it's the free version or the paid upgrade version, different ways for you to see how people are working inside your organization. With the free version of Viva Insights, it's giving every individual some visibility into how they work as a worker. It's letting you see who you're connecting with, who you're not connecting with. You can look at your personal insights as well, and go ahead and see things like, how many meetings am I multitasking in? How many times am I double booked in meetings? And so it's giving you feedback on how to improve your personal work habits. And when you get to the paid version, you can start actually taking a look at a larger level of that around teams. And so I can go and create a team, put my people that report to me inside that team, and I can start to see how we're staying connected to each other. And I can track my team and how we're working with each other and seeing our team meeting habits as an example. Okay. Now, the pinnacle of all of this, or really it's kind of the foundation after a fashion, all of those usage reports and logs, the things that feed the productivity score and the compliance score and those insights that we get through Viva Insights, is actually the Graph API. Now, this Graph API is going to go out and show you essentially the audit logs of everything that's happening inside of Microsoft 365 and inside of Azure. You can programmatically report against this using things like Power BI, or just pulling it down into an Excel workbook if you really wanted to, and doing Power View reports there. This is giving you a very detailed and deep look at what's going on inside your organization, and it can be incredibly useful. Now, the problem is it's a REST API call, and that's not exactly easy to consume. Now, you could go to your reporting team and you can say, go get your data from here, and it will take them some time to figure out how to do it. Or you can go out and you can look at some third-party tools that actually sum up those APIs and give you some pre-built reports on top of that as well. And so all of those things together, depending on how deep you need to get, and by the way, as you do your journey, you may start out by looking at some usage reports to find out how things are working. And then you may start looking at your scores, your productivity and compliance and security scores, and seeing how things are developing a little bit deeper. And then you might start taking a look at some application reports. And eventually, you're going to get to that Graph API, whether you're doing it yourself manually or whether you're going to a third-party tool to go ahead and do it. You're going to be looking at that to figure out what is that information that I need to look at, and how is it telling me where I am inside my organization. And with that, I'm going to send it back over to Tim here to talk about maturity models.
Yep, thank you, David. And so that David just did a great presentation on how to find out where you are, right? And so, but what that doesn't do, and for certain, the secure score and the compliance score and the productivity score all give you suggestions on ways to improve in each of those areas. What they don't do is help you with the strategy. Why are you doing these things? What's the priority? What's the severity of accomplishing these activities? And how are these activities that we're taking to improve those scores affecting the bottom line of the business? Right. And so that's where the maturity model comes into play, in that strategic discussion with, well, the people paying for these digital workplace environments, as well as the people who are affected by it, our employees, right? How are we making their job better? How are we helping them get home earlier? How are we helping them make more money and increasing their variable compensation or their bonuses, right? The things that are important to people. And what's the priority? Have we done the foundational work that we have to do? And what are the building blocks to get to where we want to go next for an IT organization? So when we talk about a capability maturity model, the CMMI, of course, it was being developed in the 80s. It was first deployed in the early 2000s. And since then, they've actually been making the model more generic, right? Because it started out as a software development methodology and quality control process, and it's moved out to being much more of an organizational model to help streamline overall process improvements and, encouraging efficient cultures that decrease risk in a number of ways, right? And with this expansion of the model to be more generic, it actually, when we look at these things, we look at the methodology that they use, and we have applied this methodology based on hundreds of projects with customers to focus it on the digital workplace and our understanding of the digital workplace. And so rather than just look at the generic CMMI model and try and implement that's a heavy uplift for a lot of customers. So what we want to do is push that into a specific focus for digital workplace. So when we go to the next one, David, we can see It's not not changing for me.
Hang on a second. I'll figure out what's going on there.
We don't have at least one issue.
Yes, if we don't have an issue,
it's not a presentation.
It's not a it's not a presentation if we don't have an issue. All right, let me try stopping and resharing here. Hang on a second. We get a full screen of Tim's wonderful mean there.
There we go.
There we go. We're back. Okay.
All right. So as we look at how we applied this maturity model methodology to the digital workplace, we have a number of, just like a standard maturity model, we have a number of levels, from a base level to a level of excellence and achievement. That and the way that these levels are defined is specific to a lot of the maturity models, basically, with the base being a disjointed, somewhat chaotic, siloed organization, right? And with the highest levels being a very personalized, solid experience with this, and this is the important part, continuous measurement and innovation. You're actually using analytics to understand what you're doing. You're continuing to do things that are meeting your business objectives. You're stopping things that aren't working, and you're trying and experimenting with new processes or new ways of working that you then work back through the quality cycle and see how they work for your organization and how they help you meet your goals. And then there's levels some step levels in between. And there's a cost for going from base to excel, right? From low to high. There's a cost associated with that, which is why it's absolutely important to tie it to a business objective, tie it to increasing revenue, decreasing costs, any of these optimization goals, or tie it to the mission of your organization and how this stuff helps you, how these activities help you achieve your organizational mission. And so as you move
one thing I would add here, Tim, real quickly,
Yep.
is that, one of the neat things about this is, 10 years ago, if you told me you wanted to have hyper-personalized content and you wanted to do continuous measurement on things, that would have been incredibly difficult, right? It would have required you as an organization building an awful lot of this content together. But what's amazing about what Microsoft has done, first off, in building the Microsoft Cloud and giving us that back-end integration, they've also provided us with a great deal of reporting, but they're also building in artificial intelligence, machine learning, cognitive services that are allowing a lot of the routine things that before you had to either have somebody do, a human, or you had to build systems to go do, which were expensive. Now you can actually go out and just grab those things and use things like natural language interfaces and things like text analytics and picture optical character recognition and even photographic decoding to determine what's in a photograph. You can do all of that stuff now completely transparently through the use of AI. And easily build it into your systems, which makes achieving some of that continuous measurement and improvement a lot easier to get to. So that cost that you were talking about has actually become lessened because of the work that Microsoft has put into cognitive services.
Yeah, there are things we did with predictive modeling and things like collection systems and determining workflow paths using statistical modeling, when I first started 20 years ago. And that was a $20 million project, right? Now to run those kind of machine learning models and to add that stuff into your digital workplace is a fraction of that price.
Yeah. Those are things that sometimes power users can do now by just consuming AI Builder inside of Power Apps and Power Automate.
So let's look at the next slide about value, David, because I think that's where a lot of this stuff comes in, right? When we talk about where are we deriving value out of this maturity model, when we talk about the high and the Excel areas where we have the analytics that are in there, Well, David will show you in a minute. Our full maturity model is based on our digital workplace diagram, right? So it has a number of areas that we address. And in each of those areas, we want to derive value. But when we really look at the high in Excel, it's using the analytics in your that come out of Graph and other tools that we have available to us, and really defining what's working and what's not working. I think the other piece of that is the coordinated effort. Like when you get into some of the mid levels and we're really coordinating, is how those tools help your employees work together and de-silo them. I think Cyril talked a little bit about the impact on teams versus, teams getting closer, but cross teams being more difficult. We address that in some of these specific digital workplace channels, basically.
And one thing to think about is, a lot of times organizations get into the Microsoft cloud because Microsoft converted their licensing, right? So you used to have Exchange on-premise, you used to have SharePoint on-premise, file shares on-premise, and then one day Microsoft said, hey, we're going to flip you over to an O365 E3 license instead of you buying your CALs or your eCALs, right? And people were just like, oh, okay, fine, I'm paying for it differently, but all my stuff's the same. And yeah, that's true. And then sometimes people said, okay, well, I'll start moving into the cloud, and they move Exchange out into the cloud. And if you think about it, a lot of organizations, it's the first step they take into the Microsoft cloud is turning on Exchange, right? Well, identity as well, right? AD. And the thing that's interesting about it is that, to the end user, that doesn't really improve their life all that much. Running Outlook against Exchange Online versus running Outlook against Exchange on-premise, there's not a huge difference. There might be mailbox size, right? Maybe on-premise you had very small mailboxes because you had limited disk space, and in the cloud everybody gets, basically 100 gigabyte mailboxes, which are pretty darn massive. But people are working the same way. Right, we've just moved where our back end is, and there's certain value propositions to that. Right, it can be cheaper. We have taken not having to worry about things inside of our data center anymore, and so there's value there. Right, but it hasn't really changed how we're working as an organization. Now, we've then seen organizations, after a little while of being in the cloud, they start taking advantage of some of the cool things that are out there. Somebody notices, hey, instead of me sending an attachment, it's telling me I should instead share a link. And I share that link, and oh, that's pretty neat. Now, if I share that link to Terry and to Tim, all three of us can open that file at the same time, and we can be working on it. I no longer have to send that file out to everybody, have them make their edits, send it back to me, and then have me have to put all those edits together in one thing, right? It becomes a lot simpler at that point in time.
Yeah, and David, I think, when we talk about driving value out of this, Catapult, when we come in with customers, we talk about specific, we have a number of default scenarios, like just ways that every company is going to save time, is going to save money. We bring those to the table and we talk through those and see which one of those work but then there'll be specific things for every company too. So yeah. Why don't you go ahead and talk through Catapult's specific digital workplace maturity model, so that kind of put a face to some of this discussion.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on here, and actually as I move forward here into the next section, and we talk about how Catapult thinks about the digital workplace maturity model, right? So it's how do we take this model right here, okay? And one of the things to think about when we look at this model is to realize that, at the bottom levels, that base and low level, we're talking about personal productivity improvements, right? And as we move our way up into the mid and the high in the Excel, we're starting to look at things more, not at a personal level. The scenario I told you about sending an email out, and instead of an attachment, I send out a link. That really helps me as an individual. And my increased productivity and my ability to get things done faster helps the company as a whole, right? But as we move up the maturity model, our goal here is to actually find ways that by integrating and personalizing things and then getting into measurements and getting into innovation, we're actually becoming much more business process based, okay? So if we take this level, that this kind of maturity assessment that we've looked at, that's based on CMMI, it's got the 5 levels and we kind of know where we're going on it. How do we take this and apply it back to our digital workplace house that we talked about earlier, right? And I could sit there and try to say, well, I really need to think about everything and how is my whole organization working? And the problem with doing that is, well, what if I do that, but I don't really have good governance? Does that mean that I should be way back down at base or low, even though I think that because I'm using certain tools, I should be at a mid or a high or even an Excel level? And we realized we needed to break this up into a series of different areas. Okay, so as an example, what if we started with just this digital employee experience and talked about what that really means and what maturing your digital employee experience means? Now, if you think back to Cyril's keynote, Cyril talked about people, places, and processes, and he mentioned that Microsoft and there's a lot of investment now into employee experience platforms, or EXPs. Well, the digital employee experience is really our strategic thinking about how we leverage our employee experience platform to achieve our business goals. And so when you think about it at the base level, right, it's we're back to this idea of, oh, I've got email, I've got contacts, everything is really siloed. People are using different applications. As I move my way up this process, I can start to get some personal level task management, a little bit of strategic alignment, but it's not really integrated. It's really just more by happenstance. And in fact, even in the mid-level, maybe I've turned on single sign-on, right? I'm starting to get some team collaboration, but it's really unintentional. It's that I've turned on teams and people have said, oh, I can create a team. Maybe we create a team for this project. That'd be a really cool idea. And suddenly I'm using teams to do chunks of work inside my organization, but I'm not necessarily really thinking about it from a systematic standpoint. As we move further up this maturity model, now we're trying to say, hey, am I making sure that I'm tagging my content properly? Have I got my enterprise search working? Am I actually now looking at my processes and saying, hey, wait a second, I have an onboarding process for an employee, and that involves going to a series of people in a number of departments and pulling them in together to talk about onboarding this employee, and maybe even bringing the employee into it so they have a day one experience, and everybody they need to talk to is right there. Well, what if we took that process and said, what about this process involves communication and collaboration? What about this can be automated, right? That's that services toolbox level. And let's actually create a solution around that. Okay. And it also means that we're starting to build our roadmap for our organization and how we're going to implement technology that's based on specific goals that we've identified as an organization. And we're building KPIs. We're saying, from a productivity standpoint, I want to look at how many teams we're creating and why we're creating them. I want to see how many people are working and sending messages in teams that are in a channel as opposed to just an IM. Because an IM, it's great. It's less intrusive than an email, but it's still siloed and disjointed. If I send an IM to Tim, nobody else sees it. If I post in a project channel, everybody in the project sees it. And so there's a value to that concept of working out loud we can get. And our eventual goal is to get to the very top of this, where we're saying, hey, I want to build applications out, and I want to identify the ones that have the most value from the use of our digital employee experience and our digital workplace to heighten how they're operating, and really importantly, that I can measure them and I can see that I've got specific things that I'm trying to achieve. And I can sit there and say, actually, we were talking with a customer at one point about this idea of a sales process that involves bringing in people to have a conversation with a customer. And it's a very complex process. And what they were doing before is the salespeople were immediately bringing in a subject matter expert. But there's a limited number of subject matter experts for the variety of sales calls they have and the volume of them. So they couldn't scale properly by always bringing in the expert. Well, what if we built a solution so that when I schedule this meeting with the customer, the account executive gets pre-filled with, hey, watch these videos, read these white papers so that when you step into this call with a customer next week, you've already got the context, you know what to listen to. And then when you're in the meeting with the customer, I may have a script for you. I may have an application that you can click through that's embedded in the meeting that lets you capture the customer requirements. Of course, we're going to record the meeting and transcribe it as well. And when you're done and you say, yeah, you know what, this needs to go to a subject matter expert for the next step, right? I've qualified it to that level. When I hand that on, that subject matter expert is getting the transcription of the meeting, the recording of the meeting, all of the requirements that were gathered in the meeting, right? We've suddenly built a solution that is bringing together all of that services toolbox and making my people more efficient, and I can measure that efficiency and use those measurements to then improve the next round of improvements that I put into that particular solution.
And
so,
David,
ahead,
it's not just a measurement of how fully or well we're using the technology. It's a measure of how that technology is impacting your bottom line too.
Exactly. Yeah. So in this situation, we're not talking about are they actually reading the white papers or watching the videos? No, I'm saying are the calls that I'm handing on to the SMEs, is my percentage of those that actually are legitimate leads that require that level of escalation, are they better? In other words, instead of me handing on 10 calls to the SMEs that only one of them becomes a close, maybe I'm handing on, 2, but instead of 10, but both of them become closes because they both were legitimately needing the SME, and that means that I'm using my people more efficiently across my organization. Okay, so another example inside of here, and this is collaboration. Now, there's out there, and this right here, you might recognize a lot of the stuff inside of here. This is based upon an industry standard collaboration maturity model, and a lot of the things that we did inside of here, we recognize that there's a lot of maturity models that already exist. Some of them that have built by the industry standards, some of them we developed inside of Catapult, and we recognize that all of these things eventually come together into our digital workplace maturity model. Okay, and so this one, and it's kind of an eye chart, I know, because there's a lot of content inside of here, right? But what we've done is we've said for each of the 9 areas inside of our house, we've actually got a maturity model assessment around it. But when I look at things like the analytics column, the last one down here, right? We actually have an analytics, a data maturity model inside of Catapult. And I looked at that and I talked with that team and I said, well, can we summarize this into one level? Because I could go deeper, just like I could in adoption and change management, just like I could in automation, right? Each one of these could get much deeper and have multiple dimensions beneath it. But at some point, you kind of got to stop, right? You got to say, okay, this is as far as I need to go for right now, because if I can get to this level, then what I can start to do is I can say, hey, what if I measure where I am today, right? And I can say, here's where I happen to be across these 9 areas. Some of them I'm pretty high, some of them I'm pretty low. And the next thing I can do, and this is also really cool, we start to say, well, based on the business goals that I want to do, where do I want to be? Where do I need to have my digital workplace to satisfy and meet the business needs as I move forward, so I can attain that value and that we can actually be significantly more productive, right?
Yeah, like anything, to reach perfection is always very expensive. And when we were doing these types of models for software quality, there were things like the control system software on fighter jets and the space shuttle, right? That is absolutely something where you need to be at the highest levels of quality all the time. And there are situations that are less life-threatening, right? Where it's okay to be mid-level, and the cost versus value trade-off doesn't work to go much further. That's perfect. That's a perfectly fine answer. Yeah. And so as you look at this, you'll see that some don't have a growth path for them. Others, they really want to get, on automation and security. They really want to be at the top of the, this organization would want to be at the top of their game, right? And so, yeah.
So if you look, for example, right here, this adoption and change management, in this particular demonstration, the idea is that this organization, for them to take to the next level and have standardized communication and training is very difficult, because maybe they have tens of thousands of frontline workers that cycle through because they're temporary, they're seasonal. Maybe they're only part of the company for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and maybe it doesn't make sense to do training that way, because the systems we're training them on aren't related to the work they're actually doing in their daily tasks, right? So yeah, we have to make those decisions, Tim, as you're pointing out, that make the most sense to achieve the business goals. And by doing this work this way, we can identify the business goals and then identify where we should be on this maturity model. And that lets us actually figure out what are the actual tasks we have to do to build out and solve for that particular problem. And that gives us a target from a roadmap standpoint as to how expensive it's going to be, which can be very powerful as well. So this is the digital workplace maturity model that Catapult has developed, and the way we implement it is part of a digital workplace foundations assessment. And so you know, we have a couple of QR codes here, and there's been a QR code down at the bottom the entire time that you can follow to find out more information. The QR code on the left will take you to a page where you can actually talk to us about getting and setting up a digital workplace foundations assessment. That foundations assessment is a great tool to enable us to go out and look at you and look at your digital workplace and give you a measurement of where you are on that maturity model. And then there's another QR code on the other side that we'd love for you to fill out. That is a quick survey to let us know how you enjoyed this session. And I hope you have enjoyed this session. I'll leave that there for a couple of seconds. You can always pause it and go back and get it later. And by the way, you should have gotten an email, right? It should have gone out a little bit after 11 o'clock this morning. And so if you've attended this, you should have gotten an email, and then both of the links in this email should take you to where these two QR codes are going as well. Now,
David, I would just say that one of the reasons we wanted to make this maturity model discussion part of our keynote is that the sessions following on to this look at specific areas in this digital maturity model, and they talk about either things that you can do to advance and to move up that maturity level, or they talk about how to think about their particular topic, right, within the context of maturing your organizational capability.
Yep, that's great, Tim, and that does perfectly segue into the Digital Workplace Strategy Summit Learning Hub. Now, in that email that you guys have all gotten, in addition to the links to sign up for a foundational assessment, to give us a survey, right, it also is going to give you a link to the hub itself. And so what I'm going to do real quickly here is show you what that looks like. And so this should be it right here. And there we go. There is the Digital Workplace Strategy Summit. This email will take you straight into our Wistia channel. You guys, and this is really cool because you guys have attended the keynote, you guys signed up and came here. You actually are going to get a week of exclusive access to the 20-odd presentations that we have down here below. Okay,